Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace Forum. We do this the fourth Saturday of every month, except December when we take off. It's our one vacation day. We've been doing this since about 2006, and I want to say again that my producers, Karma DeBella and Jim Lockhart, without them this wouldn't be possible. We started that up about 2006. And I'm glad that we're still doing this after all this time. The sad thing is that we're always talking about the difficulties that are happening in the world. War is at us at every step of the way. Every time we turn around, there's one more war, one more conflict. If it's not happening in the globe somewhere, it's happening in our own streets. We have a convention coming up for Veterans for Peace. The convention is going to be in Berkeley, California. It's going to be at what do they call it? The Clark Kerr campus in UC Berkeley. That's going to be August 11th through August 15th. And it's the VFP National Convention called Peace at Home and Peace Abroad, a just and sustainable future for the world's children. And the real focus of this particular convention is also to look at the environment. Oftentimes people forget about how war damages the environment and how it affects people. And why are we going to war? Oftentimes to support the oil interests and the natural resource interests of international capital. So, and then they mine that stuff and destroy the environment around it and leave the people in those countries to deal with the problems that exist afterwards. As a Vietnam veteran, was exposed to Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a problem that continues in Vietnam with hot spots in various areas throughout the country. And we have children that are being re-exposed and family members that sort of genetically or chemically that's being passed on through the cells are being born with severe birth defects. And I've talked about my child who I lost in 2000 obviously 1981 when he was 3 years old due to a heart condition and surgery that it took place. I don't want to repeat that story, but it's something that's very concerning to me. I'm going to be working on a Agent Orange workshop at the convention this year, and there's going to be a young lady there who is a daughter of a Vietnam veteran, and she was born without a leg and without certain fingers, and she's been speaking all over the world about the conditions of Agent Orange. And I've talked before. I was just in Okinawa and Jeju Island this last December. And while I was in Okinawa, I was going to go do a radio program with Colonel Ann Wright. She was going to be talking about military sexual trauma. I was going to talk about Agent Orange. And while I was there in the radio station, the people told me this base that was just below there that they had dug up Agent Orange. And I said, "You've got to be crazy. You got your studio right here." I didn't like the idea of being there, actually, at that moment, I didn't like the idea of the possibility of being re-exposed. So then they told me about this other place in Okinawa City where there was a soccer field and there were hundreds of barrels that were being dug up. And the U.S. was denying that they had Agent Orange there. Some of the barrels tested for dioxin, others were for other chemicals. But here it was right in front of a where they were going to build a soccer field. There was a grade school and a high school just down the street where military children were going to. And this is, something that both the governments, because this is Japanese prefecture, and the U.S. military base, the base is being turned back over to the Okinawans. The Okinawans are going to be rebuilding it, but the responsibility of cleanup, they suppose the U.S. would do that, but they're not doing it, and they say it's Japanese. The Japanese say, no, it's their problem. So the people in Okinawa are stuck in the middle, and they've been protesting that. There's a number of people coming from Okinawa, which when I was there, they started a chapter of Veterans for Peace from Okinawa. And some of their members will be coming to talk about various issues that they're dealing with military bases in Okinawa. And this was an incredible tour because it also dealt with people that were talking about peace. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is about how we learn to listen to other people. Rather than denying what the people have to say, we need to talk about what they're going to say. So today I have a program, and we have two people here. I have Joni Levine and Yehuda Winter, who are part of Compassionate Listening Facilitators, and they're going to begin to tell me a little bit about it. I have a little bio here. Compassionate Listening facilitators have facilitated workshops in 5 countries: Rwanda, Uganda, Israel, Palestine, and the U.S. 2 other Compassionate Listening Basics Intensives conduct monthly practice groups in Portland and offer short workshops on such groups as Mercy Corps, Air Force Diversity Council. Most recently, they are panelists at the 5th Annual Circle of Peace Seminar at George Fox University. The next basic intensive is coming up Labor Day weekend. Curiously, you also have a business that is personal ceremonies, create unique personalized wedding ceremonies for interested couples. Joni and Yehuda are currently presenting conversation cafes on Israel and Palestinian conflict. They have been on Compassionate Listening delegations to Israel and Palestine, and this past November. And once on such a delegation, it's hard not to be passionate about these projects. And I just want to make this announcement, you do have something going on this Sunday, which is tomorrow, July 24th at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral. That's on 147 Northwest 19th, Portland, Oregon 97209. Tomorrow they will be facilitating both the conversation. And here's the flyer, the bridges. Mm-hmm. If you can get a little bit of a close-up on that, Jim, that would be great. There we go. So you can see that, the Conversation Cafe. Mm-hmm. And so people, who do they call if they want to get involved, or they just come to it?
Oh, you just come to this. This is an open, free afternoon.
Okay.
We're doing the Conversation Cafe, and then we're doing an introduction to Compassionate Listening that same afternoon.
Yeah. Well, we first met because there was a project at that same church
right.
where we had Milad and Manar from Palestine. Could you tell us a little bit about what their program was as a review?
Sure. So Milad and Manar are Palestinians, and they're teachers in a small village where they live in the West Bank. And they were coming to the U.S. to tell people about their project, which focuses on using the arts to deal with trauma and to help the children have a positive outlook towards their future. Because as we know, a lot of the Palestinian children feel hopeless because of the current situation in Israel and Palestine. So they were a beacon of light, in terms of really wanting to really help the children in their village and in their little school to have a better outlook.
Now they were bringing both Palestinian and Israelis together, weren't they? At that time?
No, they were specifically with Palestinian children.
Oh, okay.
Because they're in the West Bank, and Israeli children aren't allowed to come into the West Bank.
I thought they were bringing both together.
No, there are other schools that do that.
Uh-huh.
But those are in Israel itself. There's schools called Hand in Hand, and there are 5 of those schools, and in those schools, it's not Palestinian children, but it's Israeli Arab children and Israeli children come together and educate, they're together. And in those schools, what's wonderful is that in each classroom there's an Israeli teacher and an Arab teacher that are paired. So all the children get taught in Hebrew and in Arabic. So that's a wonderful model. But Milad and Menard, they have a smaller school in a small village near Bethlehem.
They were working on another project with women too. Do you remember that?
They were working on a community scale where they were had a bunch of different educational projects happening. So something with women, something with families, and they had been doing this for several years, and they had some very good funding, and they lost that funding.
Oh.
So they're now trying to regroup and move forward.
And they were sort of on a tour across the U.S.?
Yeah, they went to several cities in the U.S. And they're in Israel. NVC, Nonviolent Communication Skills, has a presence, and they went to a nonviolent communication skills training in the U.S. while they were here.
Oh, that's interesting. So tell me a little bit about what is compassionate listening. And Yehuda, you can start with that. You started about, 2000?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so compassionate listening is a way of communicating and being in dialogue with people that is very dependent on opening one's heart. So to listen without judging, it's very hard to do. To listen to someone who you're in conflict with without interrupting can be very difficult. So what we train people to do is to recognize their triggers, the things that will trigger them, and how to manage those triggers, and how to look at the other person as another human being. We all have particular philosophies, shall we say, based on our own experiences, the families we grew up in, the communities that we were surrounded by. We certainly have a lot of pressure to feel certain ways about things. And then we feel very strongly about our viewpoints as well. But bottom line, when you can recognize the similarity in values between you and your enemy or another person, you can see, you can more readily listen, because there's a commonality, there's a humanity that you share together. And we sort of teach that, that if you listen for those things, you're much more likely to to make a connection with that person, to really deeply connect to that person, and maybe help them work through any issues that they're bothered by. You can't do that if you're going to interrupt them, or if your comment is going to be a challenging one, or you're going to put your viewpoint forward before you really establish a relationship. So, and this works in any kind of situation, because there's always differences of opinion, whether it's with your children, spouse, parents, or on a much larger scale with your work, or in the international realm, which is something that we've done too. We've really found the commonality in all the cultures that we've worked in, of people who have forgotten how to really listen to people, how to really see the other person who they may have differences of opinion with as a human being, and having some validity in the opinions that they've expressed.
How did this kind of program get started? How was that? How did it begin to have its own design, its own take off?
Well, I would say probably 30 years ago, Leah Green, who founded Compassionate Listening, was working with, what's his name now?
Really?
Perry.
Damon Perry.
Damon Perry up in Seattle. And
That was the 100 Monkey.
yeah, he's the author of The 100th Monkey. And she was taking people to the Middle East and calling and having them make connection with both Israelis and Palestinians. But she was finding that they weren't really getting much out of it because they were arguing with people who had differing opinions. A lot of the people who came with her were pro-Palestinian, whether they were Jewish or not, and they would fight with each other. They would fight with the people who they were interacting with. And finally, she found Jean Knutson Hoffman, who had been writing articles about something called compassionate listening. And she said, Jean, teach me about compassionate listening. And Jean, who's now deceased, said, I'll come with you on your next delegation, and I'll teach you on there how to listen, and I can model it, and I can teach it, I can train people, and that's how it got started. So she moved from having this group that was part of Damon Perry's organization into her own 501c3, which initially was called Mideast Citizen Diplomacy, and then eventually it changed its name to the Compassionate Listening Project, which has a really fine website, a lot of material on it, a lot of written articles about compassionate listening, and a lot of reference to
And the website is just
activities.
Compassionate Listening? Is that how you...
CompassionateListening.org.
.org.
Okay.
It has really good videos, so it's well worth checking out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you had been to, like we said, a number of different countries here. So tell me, how these programs in Rwanda, Uganda, Israel, and Palestine, how they all differ or are similar.
Well, sure. I have a donor bank of people who fund students in Uganda. And we wanted to go visit Uganda. We were going to visit the Abu Udaya community, which is a Jewish community in Uganda. And so then I looked on the map and it was like, oh, Rwanda is really close to Uganda. Let's go to Rwanda. And things led to various things. I saw that there was a fellow in the Compassionate Listening Project who had actually been to Rwanda. So I connected with him and I said, wow, we're going to be really close. Maybe we could do something. So we connected and realized we could dovetail on what he had already done in 6 different villages in Rwanda. And they had already also, since there was a genocide in Rwanda 20 years ago, so projects, the Quaker movement developed projects where they were bringing the Hutus and the Tutsis together in serious work on being in the same space and being able to acknowledge each other as human beings.
Right.
So that had been going on for many years. And that particular person who was the head of that had brought in this man who did compassionate listening as a piggybacked onto what they had already been doing. So what I saw was that we could really empower these communities to say, yeah, you've been doing this. Here's the manual, which had been translated in Kinyarwanda the year before. And you can start your own practice groups, and we'll show you. We'll do practice groups with you, and this is the format, and you can continue. So the book that had been translated is called Practicing the Art of Compassionate Listening by Andrea Cohen with Leah Green and Susan Partnow.
Face it this direction. Oh, this way. Here.
That
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Okay.
Here, give me,
I give it to you.
Let me go here. There you can see that. Okay, there we go. We're going to play
Switching
back and
things
forth here.
around.
You got that? There we
There you
go. Compassionate listening.
Yeah. So we actually discovered that Xeroxing was so cheap in Rwanda that we Xeroxed the copy in Kinyarwanda for, we had about 25 people or so per of these in these 6 villages, and we gave them each a copy of this book in their own language.
Oh, that's great.
So I thought that was really empowering to do that. And we had homestays in each village. I really like the idea of being in a homestay. I want to be with the people. I don't want to stay in a hotel or motel or someplace else. And so we stayed with pastors and different leaders and in each of these different villages.
Did you speak the
It
language?
was wonderful. What we did was we had a translator.
Okay.
Because in Rwanda, a lot of people speak English. Kinyarwanda is the base language. They speak English and they speak French, and they also some people speak Kiswahili. So yeah, we did have a translator for each of the villages for the people who did not speak English. But it's very, very moving. People really are still dealing with the trauma from the genocide.
Right. And like I said, I have an organization that I'd co-founded called Education Without Borders, and one of my colleagues has actually worked in Rwanda and helped supporting a school there, and it was working with the issue of the the genocide and bringing these two groups together to do similar things that you're talking about, but actually working and educating and creating their own school, but working together. And yeah, he went there, I think, on his first tour to Africa. He's a hip hop artist, Mike Crenshaw. Mike is now the executive director of Education Without Borders. Many of you know him from KBOO Radio. He was co-manager there for a period of time, and now is doing specifically work around hip hop music, and he's gone on hip hop caravans to Africa a number of times, and he raises money to maintain that school. Incredible piece of work that he's doing. I'm very proud to know him and be a friend. But yeah, so it just seems like all these things are coming together. It's kind of amazing how small the world is, and
Yeah.
dealing from clear over here to East Africa and around.
Well, the thing is that everyone truly wants to be listened to.
Yes.
It's a basic desire. So that when you set up an experiential program where people actually listen to each other, sometimes we listen in silence, where the listener just focuses and just doesn't say anything. And sometimes there's some interchange. But people are so, when we connect heart to heart, people just are so grateful.
Well, could you give an example of some stories that were being told, what people would be talking about?
One of the things that I wanted to bring in was that one of the basic exercises that we do at the beginning of a training, we call it 4-part listening. So we break down the component parts of listening. Listening for the story, listening for the feelings, listening for or watching the nonverbal things, which, we never know when we're speaking because we're not looking at ourselves usually, not looking in a mirror. And values, which is very key. And I mentioned that before, that's where we really connect through our common humanity. And so what we do is we break into groups of 5. So one person is the speaker, and they speak for maybe 2 minutes. And then each person rotates the role of the speaker, the person listening for the story, for the feelings, the nonverbals, and the values. And that, learning something by breaking it down into its component parts can be much easier than trying to get it all straight at once. And we, in that exercise, we'll have people repeat back to the person in a reflection, and then ask, did I get that right? And the person may say yes, or add something or whatever. Did I miss anything? Would be the next question. So there's that beginning of reflective listening, which is taught in every psych program on any kind of counseling at all. You learn reflective listening. But we go a little deeper than that because we add in the values. We look at the nonverbals and reflect that back to people. And then in a later exercise, we'll do something called deepening questions and find a way of, instead of listening to the person, you're listening for the person. So for that person's benefit, for that person's healing or whatever. And I've been present for some very powerful changes that people have had, and I've seen on tape and heard about other ones, like one Israeli, actually American born, but had moved to Israel, was doing a listening session in one of our delegations. This wasn't one that I was present for, but he had also been very active in the civil rights movement. And he was talking about the Palestinian situation, and at some point, nobody had interrupted him or anything, but at some point he kind of heard what he was saying, and he just stopped, and I don't know how many seconds it was, but there was a bit of a pause there, and he said, "I'm sounding like a racist." And then he'd go on again and catch himself again. And it was very, very powerful, I think, certainly for him, but also for the people in the room. Nobody had said anything. Nobody had done anything except be silent and listen to him and let him tell his story. And that in and of itself was enough to...
That's pretty interesting.
And we've listened to soldiers and journalists and politicians and people on the street and, just common everyday people. And, people are really craving that opportunity to, have an audience, shall we say. Just have somebody really just listen. And they pick up very quickly that we're neutral, even though everybody has an opinion, but it's on pause, or it's set outside the room where
That
we
sounds
are.
like a very difficult thing to do.
Well, this
It can be.
this story, we were asking for stories from Rwanda, and the one that I remember the best is there's an exercise called stepping into another person's shoes, where you speak from the perspective of the person you're having an issue with, and then you step into their shoes and speak from their perspective, and then you come back into your own shoes and then reflect on what you learned from the process of doing that. And this young man was talking about, his name is Marcel Nduwezu, and he was talking about an issue he had. He had a donor who was helping him go to school and who was British. And the donor told him he could no longer support him, that his financial situation had changed and he needed to support his own children, and he just didn't have the wherewithal to support Marcel any longer. And Marcel was using that money not only to send himself to school, but to support his whole family eating and their basic survival needs. And that was such a blow to him. And he talked about feeling like he felt like he should commit suicide. He didn't know what to do. But he got himself together and went on in life, and got some odd jobs and did whatever he could do to continue his education and moving along with his family. But it was so moving to see him then step into the shoes of the man who was his donor and speak, from a heart-centered space about, I'm so sorry, Marcel. I'm so sorry I have to do this to you, but I really don't have any other alternative. And then to see him now, as many years later, being able to reflect on that and forgive the man more deeply in his heart for that whole situation. And we actually, when we came back to the States, we communicated with Marcel, and we wound up helping him a bit to finish nursing school. And I have this donor program, and we're now helping his sister go to high school. And I made a commitment to myself that if I was going to be a donor or get people to donate for children to go to school, that I would see them through, through whatever program they were working towards. So that's the commitment I've continued with, and it was really from listening to that session with Marcel.
Well, I know that I went through something similar, but a little bit differently. It was sort of a retreat for veterans down in Ashland. It was called, I think it was 2008, during Memorial Day. It was called the Welcome Project, the Welcome Home Project. And we started off and sort of, just people getting to know each other. Michael Mead, who runs a Mosaic program, he took people through storytelling first and music, and then trying to get each of us to tell our stories, And I remember that, we would go through and we would argue with each other. I wasn't always just listening. We'd argue because we're passionate about what was happening. And we, there was from Vietnam veterans and some family members to the current wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, we were dealing with people with post-traumatic stress, many, many different things. Plus, we were staying at this retreat area, and we did some Native American rituals to go through this process. Finally, as we're going through it and listening, one thing it taught me is people who I might have been at odds with. I'm in the peace movement, and then there's veterans who look at it. I don't know why a veteran for peace would be objectionable to anybody, but some of the military actually looks at us as being wild-eyed hippies or something that don't understand. We got to support the troops while they're there, et cetera, and they take objection to us, even our name, But as I began to listen to people, I learned too, we're all in different places, and we've all been wounded, and our wounds manifest themselves in many different ways, and we're on our own healing path in a sense, and sometimes the same person I would be arguing with would give the shirt off his back to any veteran, no matter what side they were, to help them make sure that they can go on. And same here, I wouldn't care what their political position was. I would do the same thing. And when I realized non-judgment was a good place to start, and that's what I like about what you're talking about here is that I could now talk to anybody from no matter what position they might have. I'm very opposed to war. I'm very opposed to the military, and states that oppress other people, and these are, at the same time, I might be able to rate a person on an individual basis. Now, when you're talking about Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis that were literally genocide against each other and fighting, you're talking to, these people are talking across to each other, somebody who may have killed their mother or father. So how do they suspend that hate or anger in these conversations? I mean, I can understand, how difficult that might be.
Yeah. It's similar to the program in South Africa where people will come forward and admit their guilt and basically be tried, but it's a way of bringing about forgiveness, and it doesn't always work.
Right.
You know, it's up to the individual who's had the personal loss to do the forgiving. But I know in my own personal life, to forgive someone else, I can do that not for them so much as for me. I don't know what they're going to do with my forgiving them, and maybe that's a horrific thing to even try to do. Like, there was one guy who, I don't think he was at one of our workshops, but who talked about how he saw his parents' killer every day going to work, you know, and I think the deduction from that was, how could I ever forgive that person, you know? And maybe he couldn't, and a lot of people, you know, have a lot of issues with that. I know Elie Wiesel, who just recently died, that was a key thing for him, was for forgiveness in order to move his own life along, you know, and you know, for all the things that he witnessed, that is not an easy thing to bring about. But a lot of the people who you know, want to move on with their lives do need to set aside things. There's a very powerful group in Israel and Palestine called the Bereaved Parents Group, and these are all parents who have people who have, on both sides, who've lost their children and don't want to see other people have that suffering.
Right,
and so they're willing to move along. There's a really fine movie about, you know, you know, one particular group, and when I read about them originally, I thought, oh, these guys are just, they've got it together, you know, but they, you know, in the group, some people don't get it together, you know, some people, you know, I remember one Palestinian saying to a settler who was there, you know, you bring a gun in your back pocket every time we meet. I can't handle that, you know. I mean, what gives you that right? Or, you know, don't you see how that sets me off, you know? I can't do that, you know, but you're doing that, you know. And then that person defended themselves, you know, and it went on like that. But you could see other people had kind of gotten it, you know, how to get beyond that particular impediment to building a relationship or whatever. But, you know, for the most part, these people were finding a way of forgiving to the point where they could say, you know, we don't want this to happen to any more parents. We don't want this to happen. You know, we have to find a solution to this. We have to, you know, humanize the other.
Well, that's what sort of happened to me. You know, I mean, as a parent who lost a child that was connected to war through chemical warfare, and going back to Vietnam and going to places where these children were affected. You know, Friendship Village, and there are a number of other hospitals and stuff that were taking care of these kids, and being so well received by the people there. And almost, you know, flabbergasted by the idea that, you know, I was somebody there as a Marine, as somebody that was, you know, there to kill their people, and they were able to separate the idea of nations at war versus individuals at war, and caught in the middle of powerful entities that push people together in dangerous situations. And I began to realize, you know, I mean, I came to me when my son died. I kind of went through an epiphany, you know, in a sense, and it was a spiritual one. And I'm not a religious person anymore. I would say I was at that time, very much so. But I went back into, my wife and I went to the coast, and we're sort of grieving. And it was a very deep feeling, and as we're walking along the beach, I had sort of an out-of-body experience, and went through time, and I went through all these wars back into time, to the biblical times of Adam and Eve in the garden, or outside the garden, and Eve is holding her dead child you know, Cain had just killed his brother, and she let out this scream that shook the entire universe, and God trembled, and the angels' tears came, and they filled the oceans, and the oceans started laughing at my feet and brought me back. And I go, brother killing brother, sister, you know.
Yeah, all the way back.
All the way back in time. And I said, this is enough, you know, this is enough for me. I cannot bear that. It was very hard for me to maintain my sanity for a long time, you know, and then come back. But I realized one thing when you're talking about this is, it's not that I can forgive, but that I reduced, I did not allow hate to take over me, and I found it too poisonous. And so I would rather live with the love of the things that I can love. If I can't forgive somebody, at least I won't hate them or hate their act, and hope that they can somehow resolve their own problems, and that someday they'll find a way to demonstrate ways to peace and their own healing. But you know, there are some things I cannot forgive, and but I'm not going to hate. That's kind of a choice that I made. So that's kind of how I look at things. And as a veteran for peace, you know, we're constantly dealing with, like you said, Israeli and Palestinians together, and I've had both them on the program, IDF soldier and Palestinian, and talking, and they're good friends. I mean, they've resolved a lot of those issues. And there's movements with breaking the silence in Israel, you know, these soldiers that are speaking out, and they're telling their stories. Again, telling the stories, people who are willing to listen and hear. And they, through their own stories, they find their own ways of saying, this is wrong, it's ugly, this is not the way we as human beings should live. And that's not how we were raised. Our moral, the values that they were raised on, it's a contradiction to those values.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, so we listen on the Compassionate Listening delegation. We listen to one of the main people in Breaking the Silence. And what we do as part of the Conversation Cafe that's happening tomorrow is we have people read vignettes from the conversations that we had, and one of them is from Shai Davidovich, who works with Breaking the Silence. So just his story of how he realized that what he was doing as a soldier was immoral and unethical.
Right.
So yeah, so that's deep, you know, and it takes time, especially those soldiers are so young.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and they're going in for their country, and you know, they think they're doing the right thing, and there they are, and then they recognize these, wow, what I'm doing just doesn't fit who I am and who it is to be Jewish.
Right.
You know, to be ethically Jewish. So that's one of the contradictions that one deals with in this whole terrible situation. And for me, as a Jewish person, it's just, no, you know, it's the same exact thing I just said. It's just so immoral what's going on, and ethically so not in harmony with Jewish values. So that when we went on the project, I mean, I certainly had a bias that I was coming in with. I have to say that, you know, and we did listen to Israelis and Palestinians, but for the most part, we were listening to peace activists on both sides. We did go into the settlements and listen to two individuals who had experiences of having rocks. One had a rock thrown at a windshield, and the other one had maybe a homemade black bomb that was thrown onto her car as she was driving. A beautiful young, 21 or 22-year-old who you know,
It's driving a young friend.
driving a
home.
young friend
They happen
home,
to go
and
near a near a
so,
village.
you know, those sorts of things are happening where it's innocent people who are having these possible death situations taking place.
Yeah.
You know, but the root of the anger in the Palestinian youth, you know, is look what's happening to them.
Right.
You know, they're
And the
dealing,
magnitude of what is happening.
they're living
Yeah.
in occupied territory,
Territories,
and their lives are just, you know, at every moment in time, they never know whether they're going to get arrested, or whether their parent is going to get arrested, or their house is going to be demolished, or, you know, the whole scene is just crazy.
The Conversation Cafe, I wanted to just mention,
Yeah.
there's 3 parts to what we do. The first part, we do a slideshow that kind of puts everything in context. The people we talked with, the people who were on our group, the places we went in Israel and Palestine, you know, the barrier wall that's been set up between Israel and the West Bank. And then we do the vignettes, and and after we read about 4 vignettes, 2 from Palestinians, 2 from Israelis, with different experiences and such. We break up everyone who's there into small groups, and they do. We give them kind of a brief intro to compassionate listening. Basically, you're going to be listening more than you're going to be speaking, and they do 4 rounds of just processing what they just experienced from the vignettes primarily, you know, because there'll be 1 or 2 of the vignettes that'll really stick out, or just one of the incidents in that. And I noticed you've been projecting that's from 1:30 to 3, and then we're going to take a break, and from 3:30 to 5:30 we're going to do an introduction to compassionate listening, and this will be very experiential. There'll be that opportunity just to speak and be listened to, and then we'll do a demonstration of the 4-part listening. So people get to break up into groups, and they'll listen for either the narrative, the story, or the feelings, the nonverbals, or the values, and reflect those back. So there'll be something that people really have a concrete experience trying, or, you know, having that experience themselves, you know, being listened to, and then also of listening to others. So it'll be the Conversation Cafe. We've done several of them in different church and synagogue and different environments. And one of the co-authors of the book was the person who has kind of popularized the Conversation Cafe. And everybody will have a little card with all the principles and how the mechanics of it go to take home with them to, you know, to try out.
And also in our workshops, we combine some dance or circle dances, and sometimes some art. I'm a dance specialist, so that's one of the things that I need to bring in, is that people can gather together and to move together, and that creates a sense of unity. We're going to do something called the Elm Dance, which came after Chernobyl, what happened in Chernobyl, and that was developed for that particular part of the world. And in Rwanda, I happened to decide to do a dance where it's a biblical verse. Do you remember what that is?
Right.
What it is?
Yeah.
How good and pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell as one, and that's from the Bible.
Deuteronomy.
And as it turned out, in Rwanda they used that particular biblical passage. The government used it as one of the ways of saying, okay, we are all now unified. We're all one people. We are no longer Tutsis and Hutus and Tutsis. We're all one. And so that was interesting to bring that particular dance to every workshop we did with them. But the other thing with Rwanda and talking about that is after 20 years, the government said, okay, we're finished.
Well, they did that much sooner than
everybody is healed. We're all healed. The country is healed. We're all over this. We're done. And the group called Healing and Rebuilding Our Communities, HIROC, was the group that we dovetailed with. They're not done.
No.
You're not done in 20 years. I mean, it takes many, many years for that level of trauma to, for people to continue to deepen.
Generations.
Yeah, it takes generations. So it's very important for those people to understand that.
Well, I heard we just had somebody from Rwanda come here, and that there was a government crackdown again, and it was getting to be dangerous and had to leave the country. So those are, when they have open space, they can build things, and it became more difficult to operate in certain situations. And the problem I see sometimes for some of these things is the important thing is that individuals communicate with each other. When the media is doing it, we're doing it nation to nation and power to power structure, and they, like I said, in wars they crush people together and put people in dangerous situations. And most of the times that I was in a situation in a battle, that would be a sniper from a distance, booby traps, or people would be put in a situation if somebody's firing at you, you're just trying to survive. It's not. And I remember reading a book called On Killing. And I don't know if you've ever read that by Lieutenant Grossman, who sort of wrote the history of war. And in most cases, people their natural instinct is not to kill another person. That they have to be trained to kill. They have to be trained. And that the U.S., the militaries all over the world have been looking at how to get people to kill. In the Civil War, much ammunition was spent while people were actually shooting in the opposite direction, or trying to miss, because these are sometimes their own brothers and sisters on the other side, So you get all of these things mixed up in it, but still these people are pushing people together for these conflicts for whatever reason, whether it's money and power or oil, whatever the resources are. How do we get the governments to sit down and listen, How do we get that kind of diplomacy act? I know individually we can do that, so we can refuse to fight,
Yeah.
We've just got the 5-minute warning there.
Got that, yeah. I'm watching the clock there.
Yeah, I figured.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
that's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a major question. I think of Marshall Rosenberg, who started Nonviolent Communication Skills, and he was somebody who went into small villages where there were conflicts, like one chief fighting another chief, and he was able to create an awakening, an idea that, we don't really have to kill each other, So it requires people being trained at the level of diplomacy in these sorts of skills. And it certainly is happening. There are people, but more and more people have to make a commitment to go through the process of learning the skills of nonviolent communication, of compassionate listening, of all these different modalities to arm themselves, basically, with tools of diplomacy.
One thing you mentioned about values. We didn't talk about them specifically. So, what values? How do they begin to look at values? What do you mean by that?
Well, it could be as simple as just survival.
Okay.
killing another person in order to protect yourself or your family.
Well, listening to you right now, you've told several stories, and I know that you value family,
Right. Okay.
and you value human connection. You value peace. You value honesty.
Certainly value listening, listening to the other.
Good examples.
So
you know.
as you
Yeah.
reflect somebody's values back to them, I mean, how does that
Yeah,
feel?
Yeah, well, it does feel that I'm trying to understand. I sometimes don't see myself, but yeah, I mean that was a good example of values. One thing that I see that I have in common when I'm talking with other people is that we all love our families. We all want to be able to live a life without such struggle. We want to put a roof over our heads. We want to, most people want to live in peace. So I always find it crazy that we're in a world that's in such conflict, not just in war, but we're talking on the streets. We have the violence of the police against unarmed citizens, especially people of color in this country.
Yeah.
And then to see, and then I know too that people can only take so much over a period of time, no matter how peaceful. Black Lives Matter is a nonviolent movement, and yet all of a sudden the police are blaming them for the police being shot, in Texas, and I'm seeing it all over during the convention, Republican convention, about Blue Lives Matter, and which is basically to say, that your whole thing was screwed up and it caused the problem, when it is a whole generation of a history, and we have to break through that history. It's like I would say the Hatfields and the McCoys, that old feud that went on for years and years, and they didn't even remember what it was about. And
So there's a whole thing with a drama triangle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we teach is how to, through compassionate empowerment, break through the drama triangle. And it requires one person to speak from their heart.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to thank you for coming here. We're getting right down to the wire here, and I really appreciate it. Tell them one more time where it's going to be. And
Okay, so the bridge is happening at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral, 147 Northeast or Northwest 19th, so right off of Burnside, and we'll be there from 1:30 to 5:30 doing two workshops. And then Labor Day weekend, we're doing a full weekend of compassionate listening. Compassionate listening is our basics training, healing our world from the inside out is what we call it. And people can get in touch with us on our website or on our Facebook page, Compassionate Listening Oregon, or there'll be an event posted on the compassionatelistening.org.
well, I want to thank you both for coming. Thank you very much.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
our pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us.
You're welcome. There we go.